A poor single mother saves a man's life, not knowing he's a billionaire who's about to change hers forever. Rain fell hard that morning, turning the cracked sidewalk outside Eddie's diner into a mirror of gray puddles. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and bacon grease lingered in the air, mixing with the hum of tired conversation. It was the kind of place where people came to forget. Construction workers before dawn, truckers between shifts, lonely souls between lives. Behind the counter, Lena Carter, just 26, wiped her hands on a faded apron and forced a smile at a customer asking for another refill. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But even through it all, there was a gentleness to her, something the world hadn't managed to take away yet. She glanced up at the clock. 7:42 a.m., only a few more hours before she had to rush to pick up her daughter Mia from kindergarten. Mia was the reason she kept going. A single mother since she was 21, Lena had learned early that life doesn't slow down for heartbreak. Her ex, a man who had promised the world and delivered nothing, had left 2 months after Mia was born. Since then, it had been Lena against the world, double shifts, cheap apartments, late-night tears whispered into her pillow so her little girl wouldn't hear. Still, every morning, when Mia wrapped her tiny arms around her and said, "I love you, Mommy," it made every struggle worth it. That morning, the diner was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that makes every cough, every clink of a spoon, echo too loudly. That's when the door creaked open and a man stepped in, tall, older, but clearly frail. His suit was expensive, though rain-spotted and slightly rumpled, and his face carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. He walked slowly to the corner booth, clutching his chest as if breathing itself was a battle. "Sir, are you okay?" Lena asked, stepping forward instinctively. He nodded weakly. "Just coffee, please." She poured him a cup and set it gently before him. "Rough morning." He gave a half smile, the kind of smile people use when they don't want to admit how broken they are. You could say that. There was something in his eyes, loneliness, regret, maybe both. Lena didn't press. She'd learned that sometimes silence was kinder than questions. As the minutes passed, the man just sat there, staring out the rain-smeared window, barely touching his coffee. He looked out of place in that run-down diner, like a man from another world. When Lena came by to check on him again, she noticed his hands trembling. His lips were pale. "Sir, are you sure you're all right?" she asked again, concern deepening. He tried to nod, but before he could speak, his body tensed, and then suddenly he slumped forward, his cup shattering against the floor. "Sir!" Lena cried, rushing to him. The diner erupted in chaos. A few customers stood, others froze in shock. But Lena didn't hesitate. She'd had taken a first aid course back in high school, never thought she would need it, but now every second mattered. She dropped to her knees beside him. "Call 911!" she shouted to the cook. The man wasn't breathing properly. His pulse was faint. Lena's hands shook, but she forced herself to focus. She tilted his head back and began CPR, pressing down rhythmically on his chest. 1, 2, 3. She counted, breathless, her tears mixing with the rain still dripping from his coat. "Come on, please, don't you dare die on me." Minutes felt like hours. Then, at last, she heard a faint gasp. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but alive. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Help's coming!" When the paramedics burst through the door moments later, they rushed him onto a stretcher. Before they wheeled him out, one of them turned to Lena. "You saved his life," the medic said. Lena just stared after the ambulance lights fading into the rain. She didn't even know his name. That night, after putting Mia to bed, Lena sat on the edge of her worn-out sofa, replaying the moment in her mind. She still couldn't believe what had happened. Part of her wanted to know if he was okay. But who was she to ask? She was just a waitress, a stranger who happened to be there when life decided to test her courage. She sighed, staring at her phone's cracked screen. The clock read 11:37 p.m. She needed to sleep, Another long day tomorrow, but sleep didn't come easy. Something about the man's eyes haunted her. Not just the fear in them, but the sadness. As if he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to care. The next morning at the diner, a black car pulled up outside. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, tall, composed, but clearly out of place in the shabby parking lot. He walked in and approached Lena. "Are you Lena Carter?" She froze mid-pour. "Yes." "Why?" The man smiled faintly. "I work for Mr. Richard Hale. He asked me to bring you to him." Lena blinked. "Who?" "The man you saved yesterday," he said simply. "He'd like to thank you in person." She hesitated. Her shift wasn't over and she couldn't just leave. But when Eddie, the diner owner, overheard, he waved her off. "Go on, kid. Not every day you save a man's life." So Lena untied her apron, smoothed her hair, and followed the man outside. The car ride was silent, the city passing in blurs of gray and gold. When they finally pulled up to a massive iron gate leading to a sprawling mansion, Lena's mouth fell open. "Wait, he lives here?" she whispered. The man nodded. "Mr. Hale owns Hale Industries." Lena's heart skipped. Everyone knew that name. Hale Industries was one of the biggest companies in the country. She'd seen his face in magazines before. But the man she saved hadn't looked like the billionaire in those photos. He'd looked broken. They led her through marble halls that echoed with emptiness, until they reached a large sunlit room where Richard Hale sat in a chair by the window. His color had returned, but his expression was still weary, like someone who had seen too much of life to be impressed by it anymore. When he saw her, his face softened. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice quiet but warm. "You saved my life." Lena blushed, twisting her hands nervously. Anyone would have done the same. He smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how few people actually do." There was silence for a moment, the kind that carried unspoken gratitude. Finally, he said, "I owe you more than words, Miss Carter. Please, tell me, is there anything you need? Anything at all?" Lena shook her head quickly. "No, sir. I didn't do it for anything. I'm just glad you're all right." He studied her for a long moment. There was something honest, almost pure, in the way she said it, something he wasn't used to. "Still," he said softly, "I'd like to thank you properly." That night, when Lena returned home, she still couldn't believe where she'd been or who she'd met. Mia ran to her, arms wide. "Mommy, you're home!" Lena knelt, hugging her tight. "Always, baby." But as she tucked her daughter into bed, she couldn't help but wonder. Why had fate brought her to that diner at that exact moment? And why did it feel like her story with Richard Hale wasn't over yet? A week had passed since Lena last saw the man she saved, billionaire Richard Hale, and though life had returned to its rhythm of clattering dishes and tired smiles, something inside her had changed. She often caught herself wondering how he was doing, whether he'd recovered, whether he even remembered her. It wasn't about gratitude or reward. She just hoped he was all right. Because in that moment when his heart had stopped, when she'd pressed her palms against his chest and begged him not to die, she'd seen more than a stranger. She'd seen a man quietly drowning in loneliness. That image haunted her. One gray afternoon, as she poured coffee for a truck driver at Eddie's diner, the bell above the door chimed, and in walked a tall man in a dark suit. He stood out instantly. "Miss Carter?" he asked politely. Lena froze. "Yes?" "I'm Mr. Hale's assistant. He'd like to see you." Her heart skipped. "Mr. Hale? Is he okay?" "He's recovering, but he's insistent on meeting you." Eddie, her boss, overheard and waved her off with a grin. "Go on, kid. Heroes don't clock out." The drive felt unreal. The car glided past towering buildings, then through iron gates that opened onto a mansion surrounded by gardens that looked more like dreams than reality. When she entered, Richard Hale was sitting in a wheelchair near a window, sunlight touching his face. He looked older, paler, but alive. When their eyes met, he smiled faintly. "Miss Carter." "Mr. Hale," she said softly, unsure how to stand, how to breathe. "Please," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit." She did. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was full of things that didn't need to be said. "I wanted to thank you," Richard began, voice low and sincere. "You saved my life, and not just in the literal sense. You reminded me that kindness still exists, that humanity isn't lost." She tried to smile, flustered. "I just did what anyone would do." He studied her carefully, a faint sadness in his eyes. "No, most people would have watched. You didn't." He handed her an envelope. "Please, take this. For your daughter. For you." She hesitated, opening it. Her breath caught. Inside was a check, $250,000. Her hands trembled. "Mr. Hale, I can't take this. This is too much." Richard shook his head. "No amount could repay what you gave me. You brought me back when I had given up. You saved a man who no longer wanted to be saved." Lena's throat tightened. "I didn't do it for money. I'm just glad you're okay." He smiled faintly. "That's exactly why you deserve it." Weeks passed. Lena used part of the money to move herself and her daughter Mia into a small, bright apartment near a park. For the first time, she didn't wake up to leaking ceilings or the hum of old radiators. Every morning, she'd watch Mia run to school with her backpack bouncing, sunlight catching her laughter. And she'd think of Richard Hale. He called occasionally just to check in. Sometimes he'd stop by the diner, quietly ordering coffee and sitting in the same booth where his heart had nearly stopped. They talked about life, about loss, about Mia's dreams. Each conversation chipped away at the invisible wall between Billionaire and Waitress, leaving behind something gentle and real. One afternoon, Richard visited their apartment for dinner. It was small but cozy, a table with mismatched chairs, a child's drawings taped to the fridge, the smell of pasta filling the air. Mia laughed as Richard pretended to struggle with a plastic teacup she'd handed him, his once stoic face soft with warmth. Watching them, Lena felt something stir inside her, a quiet gratitude that someone so powerful could sit in her humble home and feel human again. Months later, Richard invited them both to his mansion again. This time, the halls were brighter, the air lighter. When Lena entered, she noticed a new plaque on the wall, a framed photo of the three of them, taken at the diner months before. Beneath it, engraved words read, "The day my life was saved, not by CPR, but by kindness." Tears pricked her eyes. "Richard, you didn't have to." He smiled. "You once told me you didn't need anything, but I wanted to give you something anyway. Something that lasts." He gestured to a table where another envelope waited. "Please," he said softly. Lena hesitated, opening it slowly. Her eyes widened. It wasn't a check this time. It was a deed. "To Mia's diner," it read. She looked up, stunned. "You bought the diner?" "I did," he said, "and I'm giving it to you. I wanted you to have something of your own, something built on heart." Lena shook her head in disbelief. "Richard, I don't know what to say." He smiled, eyes glistening. "Say you'll keep feeding people with the same kindness that saved me." She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I promise." That night, after tucking Mia into bed, Lena stood by her window, looking at the city lights below. The world hadn't changed much. It was still noisy, unfair, unpredictable. But her world had changed completely. All because she chose to help when no one else did. In saving a stranger's life, she'd found something she never expected, a friend, a purpose, and a future for her daughter. Months later, the diner reopened under its new name, Mia's Diner, where kindness lives. On opening day, the line stretched down the block. Locals came not just for coffee, but for the story, the one about the young mother who saved a billionaire and asked for nothing in return. Richard sat quietly at the corner table, watching Lena greet customers with her radiant smile. Every so often, she'd glance his way, and he'd nod with that quiet, knowing look that said more than words ever could. At the end of the night, Mia ran to him with a crayon drawing, a picture of her, her mom, and Mr. Richard holding hands under a big yellow sun. "You're part of our family now," she said proudly. Richard's voice cracked. "That means more than you know, sweetheart." He looked at Lena, the woman who had changed his world, and said softly, "You gave me my heart back." She smiled through her tears. "And you gave me a chance to live again." From that day forward, Mia's Diner wasn't just a restaurant. It was a living reminder that compassion still mattered, that even the smallest act of kindness could ripple outward and change everything. And sometimes, when the morning sun hit the diner's windows just right, Lena would look at the reflection and whisper, "Thank you." Because in saving his life, he'd saved hers too.